those buttons. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're back for some coding. And hello there, Claire. Not sure if you're unaware, YouTube has decided to use user handles, or at least user tags instead of the handle. So your @ handle is used instead of any sort of predetermined one. So if I do not recognize you, please forgive me. Above and beyond my own memory, YouTube has decided to conspire against us. But welcome nonetheless. Welcome. Checking in with the kitties real quick. We do have, believe that's Mason there. Yeah, that's Mason. Sherbet passing through the play area with Sky. Sammy getting a snack. Ember's tail visible on the table. The reason that Sammy startled a bit in the getting food was that Sherbet launched into one of those little crinkly cat tube things. Molly has moved in pursuit. One of these times I'll find the right camera angle for the play area, but for the time being, they're always slightly off camera. But it is what it is. It's going to be a coding stream today. I kept forgetting that Power Wash Simulator dropped today. So we will be playing some of that. Any hopes for further Creepy Month games are out the window. We will be doing an entranced cleaning game. But for now, more coding. So last time, we set it up so that we can enable and disable colliders, which is great. Wonderful. But we were doing it because we wanted to be able to... Let's turn it down a little bit. We wanted to be able to rig up the new spawner entities, a thing that's added to the world that will begin emitting creatures once the player is close enough. And the thought was, the player gets within range of a spawner, it trips the collision detection, spawner flips into a separate mode. Couple problems. First being that we want the spawner to be an actual entity, a thing that exists in space. That way, one, it can move around, but two, it can be hit with stuff and potentially removed. So, if all the enemies are coming out of a truck, if you remove the truck, they stop coming out of the truck. Kind of stuff. So, we set up the ability to turn off collision detection. And that's great. It lets us flip off the scenario where the enemies where it detects and begins spawning. So we've got that. But we have lost the ability for the entity to be struck if we do that. Well, we could set it up to where I can swap out the collider and say, okay, instead of this collider, you're going to use this other one, and we're going to turn this other one on, and it'll do its own thing. But that, too, doesn't work. Because there would need to be, like, behaviors for it, that kind of stuff. Suffice it to say, there's layers to this nonsense. My current thought is that we have paired entities. The first entity is the spawner. We put it wherever enemy's going to come from, or wherever we want, depending on what kind of spawner. So if they're going to spill out of a particular square or set of squares, we would probably put it near that so that we don't have to hard specify a screen coordinate. It's wherever the spawner is. but that entity would be independent of the start spawning trigger. So until this new trigger, until this trip line gets tripped, the entity does not accept collisions. Its collisions are off, and it is not spawning. As soon as that event happens, it turns its collisions on and begins spawning. That would generally be you get within a screen of this thing. Now we could make it becomes visible, but that can create its own problems. We don't want them to pop in necessarily. Hello, Ember. I have recently deployed some fresh infused catnip toys for them. Sammy in particular gets real mellow if she gets a hold of one. Oh, well, come here, Ember. Come here. Come here. Yeah, I know. I know. It's terrible. Checking her chin to make sure. I think she just had a little bit of kibble stuck to it, but Ember is one of my two that is definitely prone to acne, with Sherbet being the primary one for that. So I gotta keep an eye on the state of their chin so it doesn't get bad. Get cleaned now and again. But I want them to be able to pop in early, and collision seems like it's going to be a clean way of doing that. I'll want to have... Hey, Sticky. I know the feeling. I know the feeling. Sleep is an annoyingly rare commodity lately. Yesterday was particularly bad. Hey, you. Come here. Come here. Got a scab somewhere, baby, or what? Might just be she's grazing me with a tooth or something. Sky in particular is prone to that. When he does that whole, rub his face against you, I love you so much, he's prone to, like, slicing at you with his little snaggle tooth. They can all do that, but he in particular is prone to it. Getting there, Sticky, getting there. So I'd like a trigger that is better than collision, but I think collision is going to have to be the thing. What it'll allow us to do is to have various collider shapes for when the player is close enough for spawning to begin. That is a thing that we're going to have to mess with as far as how do I position it such that it has the right effect. It can't be a narrow thing. It has to be a relatively large collision box so that the player can't skip over it or similar. Okay. But we don't lose this. We don't lose the work we did. Being able to turn collision on and off is important. So this creates the concept of a pair of entities. One that is going to tell another to do something. But I don't necessarily want it to be that it's just the entity removed. Let's put it another way here. So we made Where is it? Not a multiplier, it's spawner. Spawner behavior. Okay. So right now we have, if the spawner gets a collision, it's going to activate its spawning process. It's going to stop colliding, and it's going to start reacting here. We would set spawning to on here. Big head cheat code. Some of that can be very dependent on how you're presenting stuff. Different things can be scaled in different ways, you know. I can't remember what the game was called, but one of the early ones really famous for that. They just, you know, scaled up the model. I think they did. You know, I don't know. Maybe they had a replacement sprite or something like that for the head. Like, used an entirely different display mechanism. How are we going to do this? Because we don't want ultimately a special, well, I don't want to use a generic message for it and say when this entity is removed, because that can result in some weird conditions happening. As in, when I'm shutting down the game, I don't want all of the spawn points to trigger. But I also don't want the entities to have to be necessarily very special. I mean, ultimately they would be special. These are going to be an entity that has a very specific collision behavior. And they would have a very specific event that, or set of events that they could raise when triggered. That way I can have any number of subscribers to a tripline. Then those behaviors can determine when the tripline is fired. We do it the other way around, that can also work. But I like the ability... I don't want to get overly complex with this, but that's kind of where we are. I kind of want it to be one-to-one, that you don't have multiple tripwires. Sorry, multiple triggers off of one tripwire. Because that can be non-deterministic which one fires first. But for convenience sake, that could still be handy if, say, I want to turn on 3 spawners at once you enter that screen. Having multiple triggers isn't necessarily any better. I could have the "you have entered room 3" trigger, and then all of the spawners could be attached to it. Kinda like that. What that means is that we would have an event that is, let's call it triggered message or something like that. And whenever an entity is going to fire off something in response to some other event, they can fire it through triggered message. But it's not really the entity doing it. We want to be able to configure all of this stuff inside of our level definition. So we don't want it to be overly convoluted to get the logic in there. I want to be able to say this is a trigger for these entities. So I define a trigger in code or in the data, and I use that trigger within the level definition and say this is the trigger, these are the spawners, this is where they are. You'd have kind of like almost like a dictionary of this trigger to, it's not really a dictionary, again, they're kind of tuples. Or is it tuples, you know? It's a generic word for more than one thing bound together. What we want to be able to do is create one of these things, this special kind of entity, that has collision space. So it follows the entity rules as far as coming into existence, and its only behavior checks for collision messages. So it is bare bones as far as what it does. I could make an entirely specific entity that just relays the collision message, or a special variant of collision message that upon this circumstance emit these messages, but that removes some flexibility from the entity. What we're faced here is a potential overcomplexity scenario. I don't want to make something so generic that it ends up getting that it ends up contaminating other elements of code that it doesn't need to. So if I make it so all entities have this like trigger message and that other entities can listen to those entities, does this actually help me, kind of thing? Or is it going to be something that becomes a loose end that could get used in weird ways if I don't keep the code base clean? That's always something to keep in mind when you're adding to a code base, is it's distinctly possible that you will add something that works for its designed use case. It's great, and then subsequently its presence is convenient. Like, hey, we could just use this. And now the core use case for that feature has expanded. It's no longer tied just to its original intent. It's tied to this new secondary one. But that secondary one might be ultimately start to diverge from the primary, or vice versa. And the more things that you graft on, the worse that gets, until eventually you have a piece of functionality that is being pulled in a lot of different directions at once, and it becomes harder to maintain or update. Simultaneously, we don't want to make it so specific that it becomes kind of a landmine somewhere. That's where my thought process is. Hello, Clever. Welcome. Your name is familiar, so I will say welcome back. Okay. So this general behavior, the flow of events is kind of what we want. But the spawner begins spawning when it gets this different kind of message. And what we want to have happen is that the actual spawner entity can have a behavior that is listening for a particular kind of message. which is effectively the wire was tripped kind of thing. So on this side, process message says if I get a message, this is where it comes through. Well, it gets handle message, and then handle message relays into process message, so we have a clean override point. Since all behaviors can have like a little spin on this stuff. Yeah, so handle message is where all messages come into on an entity. There might be a gate on them. The presence of the gate is what we use to determine whether process message gets called, and process message can be overridden by child objects. What do we do here? So we could have it where entities are registered as part of the trip line. But that does mean that the trip line needs to keep track of those entities so that if they go away or get reused in some fashion, that it doesn't call them, which would necessitate that the trip line call register on remove entity for everything registered with it. That feels like we're not adding simplicity here. Tripline entities could have a specific function to them, or a specific event to them. So it is a subtype of entity that emits messages based on its behaviors. That makes behaviors specific. There are going to be behaviors that only work for tripline entities, and that in and of itself is a bit of a landmine. Because I then need to know, is this a tripline entity behavior, even if it would be convenient to use elsewhere. This is that convenience thing again. It might result in a problem for us. Because now I can only use that behavior in a tripline entity. Whereas, in theory, spawner behavior can be used on anything. If this spawner behavior is set up, then all of its logic can fire no matter what I attach it to. So I could have a trigger message. That's very generic. But this is something is acting as a trigger. In general, behaviors would do this. They would send a trigger. They would set off a trigger. So an entity might emit a trigger. Anything that has a behavior that is watching for triggers could subscribe to that. They monitor that signal. That it prevents the idea of multiple varied triggers, like this looks for a proximity trigger and it looks for this kind of trigger and this kind of trigger. This is entirely a something says whatever condition I am associated with has been set off. Hey, Cruel. Hey, Lunar. Did I add the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids level with the Praying Mantis boss yet? I have not. I've actually tried playing Grounded a couple of times. In particular, Grounded 2. Like, I'm keeping an eye on that one. I tried playing Grounded 1 and I refunded that. That's clunky. I like 2 better. That said, it's a survival craft game, and I have very low tolerance for those games as they are normally set up out of the box. So I usually end up wildly editing like server files and the like so that it's more to my taste. I particularly object to the I will starve to death within a day kind of thing that most of these games use. Yes, there's some verisimilitude to the idea that they have been shrunk down so their metabolism would be altered, but there's a whole lot of other concessions made to the fantasy. Cruel, we're using Godot. Okay. So that's what we want. We want a trigger event. And I think entities can do that. I think I will declare that this is a entity trigger event. Now, at a minimum, we need it to have an entity. Well, we don't need it to have an entity, but we're going to have the entity to say this is the thing that is setting off the message. I prefer Godot over Unity because I am now used to it. Any folks actively working in Unity as small projects, I don't know that there would be any problem. But at this point, I don't trust that company at all, given the sort of shady stuff that they tried to get up to recently. And I was already kind of leery of the company, given that a major executive had gotten up in front of folks and said, if you aren't like hyper monetizing your game, you're stupid. In reference to things like microtransactions and advertising and all of that. So, you know, there's a corporate level concern surrounding that thing. Unreal has its own corporate level concerns, but so far they haven't jumped out there with the "hey, we're evil" signs waving. This is super vague, but now, do I want there to be a message to this? Because we could have a message to it that says this is the kind of trigger. I don't know that I really like that. Don't know that I really like that. I kind of like the idea that if I get a trigger event, it's that I was wired up to something that emits a trigger, whether that is proximity, a door opened, health went to a particular level, entity was removed, whatever it was, there was a behavior or similar that said, entity, you have been triggered. And that other entities that are watching that one will get the message that says a trigger happened, do your thing. Yeah, we're gonna roll with that. And yes, there is the sort of comedic use of triggered here. Because an entity can be triggered. But I don't care. You're going to add an invoke on the entity. It's unfortunate. Okay. Cruel, the choice of engine is kind of multifold. One, there is the because I want to. And we must not underestimate because I want to. Um, because that can supersede everything. Uh, the next is function. Some engines are going to be good or bad at things. Generally, it's going to be they're bad at things. Um, I'm setting aside they're not efficient at it. Um, like Unreal Engine is remarkably capable. You can do a lot of things with it, but that also generally means there's a lot of footwork that you have to put in place to do some simpler things that other engines might be out of the box solid at. Not the best you could be, but easy to do. So, for example, was it Game Maker and RPG Maker are two that are pretty good at, you know, move around, interact kind of RPGs, with RPG Maker specifically being good at your Dragon Quest and similar kind of classic JRPG. They've got a lot of built-in stuff out of the box. Doesn't mean you have to use them, doesn't mean that they're the best for it, but it might let you short-circuit some of the footwork that you would need to do. Hiding some things from Molly. Has noticed some bags. Making your own engine, I would put out there as that is a only because you want to or because you need to. Because there's a level of complexity to that is often going to be unnecessary. So let's say I really want to understand how to use OpenGL at a low level. That might be the entire intent of the project, and so I might make a pseudo graphics engine that could then extend into, say, like a scripting language, and I have now made a game engine. Hooray, but a lot of them can already do that. So that was entirely because I wanted to. Sometimes it's because you need to. I loop back to it a lot. Noida has its own game engine because it does physics simulation on every pixel in the game world within like a many screen radius. So, there is water dripping, water pixels dripping 2 screens over. What does that do? That's not something the default loops that are available in things like Godot are going to handle very nicely. There are simulations out there for it, but then using it in a game context adds a level of complexity. So maybe you do a custom engine because of something like that. But it is not fundamentally better. Just like using any other powerful tool, if you don't have a reason to use that powerful tool, you often invoke the cost of using it. The overhead of doing it right, as opposed to the overhead of whatever the engine requires to do it properly. This is... Oh, I'm going to need to change that. Let's get that. Do we have a remove method? We have the event. Oh, that's not good. Yeah. Right, Lunar. It generally comes down to what are the limitations and how much effort does it take to get what you want. So, if, for example, an engine doesn't allow you to use a particular plugin or similar that another one does, and you really want to use that, you might be able to graft some other elements onto it, make your own modifications to make it work. But then you had to do that, and you have to maintain that. So that was a cost to do, and perhaps that cost to do is not something you want to spend, or isn't worth spending, or you just don't want to. But there is nothing stopping you from going out of your way with particular things. I mentioned RPG Maker. That was originally built hardcore to look a lot like Dragon Quest. And to behave a lot like Dragon Quest. But people have written plugins that completely change the way that it operates. So you can absolutely use that kind of tool, and if there are things out there that modify it to make it do exactly what you want, great. Then you can look at what is the price of entry, like how much do I need to know to start, and to make the quality of thing that I want to make, or the type of thing that I want to make, versus what the output is. If I am using the most, if I'm at machine code level writing Dragon Quest 1, why are you doing that to yourself if that's not what you explicitly wanted to do? There is no amount of fine graphics driver level optimization that you need for Dragon Quest 1 or similar. You know, what are you trying to do explicitly? Make informed choices. Okay, so I could have a trigger on collision thing that will say, if I get a collision message, I am going to take my entity and invoke triggered on it. When I am setting up the world, what I can do is pair trigger entities with other entities that will be looking for that message. So that entity will have how does this get out is the thing. Where does this go after? Because then it would go into that still puts us in the territory where there is a trigger message. Because then I roll it down through the behaviors and say, do any of you care that this trigger came in? Because then in entity, I could have a place where I can bind that. So I could have a method that is attach trigger where I listen to that event. I then need to maintain that. Ugh. What if we do it the other way around? If the trigger is subscribing to we just want a relay ultimately. When this happens, send this message to the relevant entity / entities. I'm just trying to think through what's going on here, Cruel. We're getting a bit of a stream of consciousness. So what we're looking at right now, let's look at it in the sense of a, like, you know, dungeon crawl trap. There is a pressure plate on the ground, and when you step on the pressure plate, you get arrows to the face. So what I have is a trigger, and I have a trap. The trap does a thing when it's triggered, and the trigger sends that, causes that to happen. I'm looking at how to connect those two things. What does what? It would make sense that an entity that has an attached trigger would listen for anything that is triggering it and would react accordingly. So that entity would need to attach any triggers, and if it had one, it would remove it at the end. I think that can still work. So if we look at looking for any debinding that we have, where we attach entity health. I mean, microtransactions are just in general a thing, Cruel. Whether the mechanism is toxic and in what direction depends on the use case. If a person is spending outside of their means, that's a danger to them. But also keep in mind, you know, free will exists. If they really want that, then they really want it. Now, a business can also make microtransactions part of a toxic ecosystem. That is, they can set it up so that they are pulling on human psychology strings to compel people to spend more money. And that's where you get into that territory where people feel like they have to. Fortnite skins is a classic one. There are going to be other examples. Where there is a social compunction to do it. So, you know, all your friends have a cooler one, so you need to have a cool one too. There's that aspect. There's all of the dark patterns for making it so that it costs you more. But, you know, it's going to vary. It's going to vary. I lived through the era of full DLC, like expansion packs being the norm. So a lot of the elements around microtransactions, gotcha, and that kind of stuff feel kind of foreign to me and have a bit of an ick factor to them. You know, if you're going to have this thing, why don't you just let me buy it? And the reason is because it's a toxic pattern that they're setting up in that case. Like, well, you know, you can't really buy it. You have to open blind boxes. Like, well, what if I never get what I'm looking for? Oh, well, but maybe next time. That is your willful toxicity kind of thing. It's that they know what they're doing is evil. They're doing that on purpose. Exactly. Fear of missing out is an incredibly powerful motivator. For those joining us, we are attempting to set up a trigger mechanism for entities that when something happens to one entity, that entity will call out to other ones that have kind of subscribed to it and tell them a thing happened, do stuff. So this is the, you know, pressure plate to a trap. For our particular case, it is a proximity detection. It has a big collision bubble, and when it gets a collision, it's going to call out anybody that cares this trigger happened. But how to do that most cleanly? Optimization is a how far do you want to go, Cruel. There are limits, but there's always more you can do. Like I mentioned last time, I have currently achieved good enough for my purposes. Good enough, the bar that is good enough may change subsequently, but there you go. As far as does it work on specific processors or stuff like that, I have no idea. And at the moment, that's not my concern. So I could have just exposing this. Hello, Donald. Welcome. I could just have that entities can subscribe to that message, and that when they're done, they would desubscribe to it if it's present. Because we don't want this triggering null messages or null functions. So that would mean that any entity that subscribed to a trigger would need to remember that it subscribed to that trigger, so that it would then clean itself up accordingly. Yep, we're still working on the game, Donald. Way back in the day, Cruel, I did learn some OpenGL. It's not something that I care to do because it's very low level. And my only encounter with the concept of CUDA is that it's a type of core on processors, which means why the hell would I do that? That is way lower level than I would care to deal with at all. Oh. How do we do this gracefully? Now, I could say that a given thing only has one trigger. That would be an assumption that we could make right now. Because otherwise we have this song and dance where when I assign a trigger, I have to watch out for that trigger being removed, because if it is, we're done. We can't be triggered anymore. Hearts could invoke a trigger, but that would... So, for a trigger to happen, there needs to be something that specifically cares about it. So I think an event structure is still where we want to be. So, for example, a single pressure plate can set off multiple traps. A single proximity monitor can set off multiple spawners. That would be possible, Lunar, insofar as the trigger will ultimately be a message that the target entities propagate. Just a second here. Let's do a bit of scribbling. Get this in here. Okay. So we have... So we have a trigger, we have a spawner. Maybe another spawner. When this one goes off, we want to send the event to both of these. So for that to happen, these have said this trigger plus equals our function. But to make that graceful, we need to be monitoring if this goes away. So we would have a onTrigger removed method. Most likely with triggers, Lunar, it would be stuff like this trigger died. It lost all of its hearts or something like that. That sets off the trigger because it has a behavior that watches for that event. Then the trigger message gets sent to those entities, and if they have any behaviors that care, they could emit messages. But right now, hearts only take damage messages. I believe that's how I set it up. Actually, I think I set it up differently than that. Okay. First, the hearts get the hearts could react to a trigger. A heart being a trigger is fiddlier. It is possible. It is possible in that the heart could then say, entity invoke trigger. Like, my owner entity invoke this trigger. So, possibility. But that just gets into layers of convolution, because a trigger would still need to be connected to something, and that's a very particular case. It doesn't have to be on world map setup, but the entities both need to be present to attach to each other. The process of compilation, of final compilation rule, will turn a program into a series of instructions that operating systems can understand. So at most there's going to be a layer of interpretation between the executable and the low-level the low-level object logic of the system. As you seem to have a great interest in machine and binary interpretation, there is going to be a large amount of reading material out there on that topic. I'm by no means a teaching professional or similar. So if it's time pass message, we do that. We always send it through health to see if health cares. Health cares, haha. If it's an end state message, we'll do end state stuff, and we also let all the behaviors know about the message too. Entity movement is... This is something that was added, I think, during one of our downtimes, and that's that when a behavior wants to move the entity, it passes in a movement concept. That is, how fast it can go, what is the velocity vector, is there a height change, is there a rotation change, is there a change in speed? These things are handled linearly. They're each passed in as a collection because any form of movement takes a slice of the speed of the entity. So if the entity moves at 96 and there are two, then each of them will have a speed of 48 by default. It's capped at max speed. And we can also alter the speed as far as that individual action being taken, so henceforth the speed is different. So I could have a hash set of entities that are... These are triggered entities that we would attach, and anytime the trigger goes off, we would inform those. We would send a trigger message. Which leads me down the road of, do I need this? Because if an entity goes away, I don't want to be calling its method. So I would need to have onRemoveEntity for each one that I subscribed to. No, that should be handled by... Okay, we're at kind of an executive decision moment, is if we say triggers are one-to-one, then every trigger goes to one entity that listens to it. So this pressure plate invokes this trap. I could have multiple overlapping pressure plates, but they only set off one trap each. I kind of don't like that. Again, the idea of a you are on screen 3 trigger with all of the spawn points for screen 3 waking up as soon as you set that trigger off feels graceful to me, feels right. Which means the trigger has to send out a message to multiple entities anytime that happens. Those entities being subscribed to a signal from it could work in that that entity would invoke its message with the expectation that any entity that is going to go away desubscribes to that message when they do. So if they have been given a triggering entity, then they would always react by saying, if that entity is removed, we don't care if the triggering entity is removed unless... I'm trying to make it so that I have to track the fewest things. And if I add it to where the trigger is specific, we start reusing entities. Okay, again. So I have a trigger here. What I wanted to do is set off each of those entities. Well, what we're doing right now is we're saying under some circumstance, entity A informs entity B and C that something happened. That's it. That's what we're doing. And I am attempting to come up with a structure for it so that I can tell some combination of them about that relationship. Whether it is I tell B and C that you should listen to A for messages, or that I tell A that B and C are the target of its messages. Both of these have cost to them. But I am tempted to say that I'm looking for that this thing sends messages to these things. So A sends messages to B and C. What we can do is then have supply A, B, and C, such that A only cares if B or C go away. because we get the message that says this entity goes away. So we have a hash set of entities, just so I can find them and remove them. That seems entirely irrelevant, Cruel. I do not get what you're saying there. So A has a collection of things that it triggers. Whenever it gets one of those, it adds a onRemove entity call to it, so that if this gets removed, it's going to pull it out of that collection. And then whenever it invokes trigger, it's going to go through its collection of triggering entities, or entities to trigger, and send a trigger message to them. We don't want to do triggers globally because that's going to waste a lot of processing. I think that's what we're going to need to do. So we don't have a trigger event. Okay, so we have a hash set of entities to trigger. My keyboard still doubles up on I now and again. Have a think that we have a try. If not, hello AFK, welcome. Let's remove. Then that contains it removed. Okay. have a really want it to be that. We could have it send whatever kind of message it wants. This is effectively a when this happens, send this message. So we could send any kind of message during a trigger. But I feel like there should be a specific kind of message to this that is a trigger message. So that we just relay it through handle message. Yeah. Yeah. So most of the message types are just a class so that we can say, is it this specifically? Let's say public partial. We can eventually add stuff to it, but we can default this to where you could force it to send a specific trigger message. Okay, I can't just default it to something that is not precompiled. Oh well. Kind of like the idea that that's how it's going to work. No, let's go to handle message, trigger message. Okay. If an entity is triggered, then we set this stuff off. So the pattern would be that when we create an entity, if it is going to have a trigger, then we have to call add entity to trigger on the pair of them. So the pressure plate gets add entity to trigger, gets this called on it with any of the traps as the to trigger. Once we do that, we're watching to see if the trap gets removed. If it does, we're going to pull it out of the collection of things to trigger. We're not going to watch it anymore. If the trigger gets called, we iterate over each of them, and we call handle message with whatever this was. For the time being, anytime this is called, it's probably just going to be new trigger message. But what it allows us to do is have specific types of trigger message. Send is equal to null. That, and that is equal to null. I like using Visual Studio Code. I prefer it over VS Code. I'm using Visual Studio because I'm doing this in C# and not in GDScript. In theory, I could do the code in the Godot editor as well, but I don't see a reason to do that. I have a better tool for it available to me. Okay, so no matter what, we're going to make sure there is a trigger message, even if it is empty. This way we can just call trigger if we don't want a specific message. That. Okay, so now when we're setting up the spawn points, we need two things. We need the type of trigger and its location, as well as what the spawners are and their location. Beverage. All right, let's get an interim going here. Still builds, right? It's not exploding every time an explosion goes off, so that's a good sign. Blobs are being removed and we're not having problems. Okay. Let's see. All right, now we need a general pattern for setting this up. So we can create a series of triggers in our level, and then we would create a series of spawners. So the triggers and the spawners would have locations, and then the spawners are bound to particular triggers. At the moment, I would really just want a trigger bound to one or more spawners, but there is technically nothing stopping it from being a many-to-many relationship. Is any of these triggers can trigger any of these 5 spawners kind of thing. Once it's set up, the triggers and spawners are no longer really relevant for the level. That is, they cease to matter. once they're created. As far as like the level logic, they operate autonomously once we create them. I mean, the compiler isn't noisy, and the beverage is for hydration. I'm very desk bound, so it's very easy to become dehydrated. You get locked in and you don't pay attention. How do we set this up? So in my map, I have little rectangles. I have a series of triggers. I have a series of spawners. Each of these has a position. I mean, I've had build errors before. It's frustrating, but it's part of the process. Then we can have this idea that each one can do many, or each one could do one. So we have a which trigger, where it is, and then what it's bound to. Again, we're going to roll with the idea in practical sense, we can't have a spawner defined in the world as something that acts as a trigger. In a programmatic sense, there's nothing stopping me from having layers upon layers of triggers. But for the current time period, we're looking at something a little more linear. I would still like the ability to create a spawner that is triggered when another spawner is removed. Like an on-death trigger kind of thing. So we could make that part of the definition of a trigger. Would be subsequent entities that are part of it. But that's getting into real convolution territory. We can't be sure in JSON whether any of the entities will be loaded in any given order, especially if any of them are part of another data file. Would I still play a game if the company behind it has some bad publicity? I would generally avoid dealing with a game like that, especially on stream. Off stream, if I were to do it, I would be quiet about it as far as being on stream. A good example is a good recent history example of that kind of controversy was the Hogwarts Legacy game. A lot of folks are, I believe justifiably, not happy with J.K. Rowling, and thus don't want to give her press and resources via purchasing her products. This is not a matter of you already purchased a book in the past before it became very apparent or hard to ignore that she was a bit evil. This is new stuff, where you know that your stuff is that part of your money that you spend on a product is going to a person that has beliefs that don't align with yours. Yeah, I would avoid that and avoid the issue or state my reasoning for not doing it and not do it. If it was something that I wanted to do anyway, but I knew people would be upset, then the options are either shut your mouth about it. Don't try to argue with people that believe differently than you when it's on an ideological basis. Often that won't do anything. Alternately, stick to your guns and accept the consequences. Just because it's something that you like, if people say, I'm going to dislike it if you do that, then if you do it, they're going to dislike it. Take the consequences. Cruel, if it's a game that I like and they're making more games that I like, then I would still play it. That is not an uncommon sentiment in the world. It's a strangely straightforward question. Let's put a different spin on that. If you like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and a company keeps releasing a newer, better peanut butter and jelly sandwich that is even more delicious than the prior one, would you still eat it? If I don't like the new thing, then I don't like the new thing and I wouldn't play it. How to structure these? If I define all of the triggers and all of the things that are triggered, and then I process it after. Let me look at our world map here. So we have an initialize for a world event list. Event list we call initialize. We're just setting up all of these. One of the things that's going to change is this world event list effectively goes away under this model. because for the most part, spawners trigger when you get close enough to them. Some spawners would trigger at time markers. So it just becomes a series of triggers and events. So we would create, if we create all of the spawners in the world that cause events to happen, whether they begin spawning or they do a one-off thing, we could then create all of the triggers, put them in place, and bind them to the corresponding events, or vice versa. Doesn't matter which order we put them in. This does... If we create all of the triggers, like... Well, if we create all of one or the other, then we could be set as far as daisy chaining them. Yeah. So we create all of the map entities. We put them in place. Then... Okay, cool. So, as I have stated many, many times, I have no idea which processors or graphics cards, especially older ones, will be able to run this game. I am attempting to build it to be as performance capable as possible, but I am currently making zero guarantees about what it can run on. That will be something that I find out down the road once I'm done. Once I'm done, I would probably try to benchmark it so that I could get the proper system requirements on the game. But we aren't even in alpha yet. Will run on this particular species or genus of potato or whatever you call it is not in the cards at the moment. Okay. So if I create a list of all of the map entities that I want to exist, and then I have a list of all of the pairings that they will be tied to. I will need to have logic that something doesn't collide to start with. But if I just have timers and proximity, I think that should be enough, right? No, I want to be able to daisy chain them. There will be limitations to that. But okay, so what we do is instead I have gonna have this. Well, I try to be to make the stream conversational and to entertain any conversation or questions folks might have. But I will say there is a limit to how many times I can answer a given question before it does become frustrating. And there have been a non-trivial number of your questions that amount to something that I have answered at this point probably dozens of times for you. And I would like you to reflect on that to some extent of, as a viewer, as somebody that I am having a conversation with, it feels like you're not paying attention to the answers if I'm answering it numerous times like that. And at least for me, that feels rude. And that is like the rule of the channel, is don't be rude. Whether that be to me or other people in the channel, that's like the one rule. Okay, so we have all these, we have a position for them. Then we have a list that amounts to like this one to this one, this one to that one, and this one to that one, kind of thing, where we are binding specific ones together. It's not the greatest example. Let's do this one to this one, and this one to this one, and then this one to that one, and this one to that one. And technically we can have things like a square. Where we have then, like, let's say this last trigger sets off this one, and when this one fires, this next one fires. Just so. So what this does is, first I say, these are all the things that exist intrinsically in the level. This can also include things like, is there a power-up on the board? Is there a exit gate on the board? All these things get created. Then I have a listing that says, are any of these trigger relationships? So this one triggers that one, I bind them together. So I'm going to need to make sure that all of the logic that makes it so that these are not ready to be set off is baked in. So something like collidable is set to false by default, kind of stuff would need to get set up. So these are our two data structures here. Let's make it orange. We have this thing. And we have this thing. I mean, technically, we could consider this thing separate. These are positions. So what are they, where to put them, and then a bunch of key value pairs of this one to this one, this one to this one. So I can probably have two data structures here. Yeah. Okay, we more than missed our first break marker, so we're going to take it here, and I will be right back. And back. Let's see here. Is data going to save mid-run or a point-based system levels maps? Okay, so our general pattern that we're looking at is roguelike run iteration. So there are two levels of save data. There is the save data that represents your overall progress across all runs, and then save state within a given run. I can't, at the moment, I'm not guaranteeing a save state within a run, but from a accessibility perspective, I would want save state within a run. So there is a temporary state that says I'm in the midst of a run, that if present, as long as you don't start another run, makes it so that you can pick back up where you left off. If you end a run, either by victory or by loss, then we tally some sort of result from it, apply that result to meta progression, and then the loop begins again. So it is effectively start run, core mechanical gameplay, so then during that loop we might have a pause state that you could go into, whether that's a an auto save kind of come back later, or it's just running that game state. That game state ends, we get some sort of result from that, and we start back at the beginning of the loop. Core gameplay is begin a map, move through the map, defeat enemies in the map, and either be defeated by enemies or get to the end of the map. Then either you are at a victory state, you didn't get through and you're at a loss state, or you proceed to another map. Hey there, Schmuggums. A lot of cheat engine style software cruel is dependent on registry editation, or library injection, or any number of other things. I have no current intention of spending resources on trying to mitigate that. That is an arms race that I don't feel like I'm gonna win. I'm not looking at a multiplayer game environment, so mechanisms for trying to protect against that sort of injection aren't really on the books. I'm not looking at having some sort of anti-cheat layer, both from an expense, an implementation, and just I don't feel like I need to bother. As for things that might deter it, I have some thoughts on that, but those are thoughts as much about kind of meta game kind of stuff, and that's under wraps, Yes, Lunar, that's one of the elements, is that I do intend to encourage modding. Our whole data structure currently facilitates it. There is nothing stopping you from adding new enemies into the game. Once I've got this data structure that we're looking at here, whole new levels could be added to the game. If it's an entirely single player experience, we're not talking about leaderboards, we're not talking about any sort of ranked play, no multiplayer kind of stuff, then cheating isn't really cheating. It's not even a you cheat yourself, it's you're playing a game by yourself. Play it however you want. There isn't a correct way to play Legos, you know? So you can't really cheat at Legos. If I'm playing with other people and we're all in agreement that this is okay, and again, we're not dealing with some sort of meta community-based stuff like competitive play or leaderboards or anything like that, then who cares? It's like modded Among Us, you know? Don't want to play modded? Don't play on a modded server. It's only when there is some sort of consolidated multiplayer where it is possible that you will not encounter you will encounter somebody who isn't of the same mind when it comes to how the game should run. So I join a public server in Battlefield that has the normal rule set, then somebody cheating is going against the general expectation of all of the other players. That's cheating, whether it's just that they have changed the player model that everyone else will see or something like that. We are discounting the idea of completely harmless cosmetic changes, UI changes, that kind of thing. There's no gameplay impact. I don't care. If you want the face texture of all of your gritty soldiers to be anime girls, you do you. But, you know, the ability to see through walls, okay, now we have given ourselves an advantage over other players. I don't know if you're trying for irony there, Cruel, but by asking that question, you have asserted the answer yourself. The fact that you asked that question during this stream at this time implies the answer. Okay, so now we need to create the new, effectively, event list. So in our level, we currently have a world event list object. Instead of that, well, in addition to that, we now need an extra set. So with entities, I don't want to fully define the entity. So these are going to be, this is going to be a series of parallel collections, which could be a hassle. So I could just do key value pairs. Okay, let's map this down here. Integers. Integer pairs. Okay, so during the initialization of a map, and I want to clean this up. We need a pattern for this in our services that is initialize this thing. Like, this whole thing needs to be initialized so that all of the stuff is ready. Okay. So we're going to create a listing of this thing at this point. Like I said, Gruel, it's the nature of the channel that it's a conversational flow. Some people like to have a conversation for a bit. Some people don't. Some people just listen. Some people are very active. It is the choice of the individual to engage in conversation or not. Nobody is obligated to join in or to even answer. Conversation should always follow a rule, like, again, the basic rules. Don't be rude. If you demand that somebody join into the conversation, that's rude. If the conversation is entirely one-sided, that can be an issue, but frankly, if you want to spam chat and you're not disrupting anything, feel free. But recognize if it seems like it's a one-sided conversation, then I might not answer. And consider some elements of the prior prior conversation that happened to you before the last break. So we define all of them and where they are. So we're going to iterate through this collection. Might be a series of data values here. Kind of a hassle to have them separate, but annoying, but I don't think we can avoid it. But we're going to take this entity, we're going to put it at this position. Then, for each one of those entities, tiresome. As mentioned, I really do like it to be a conversational channel if you have questions about the code or similar. But if you're just lobbing random questions at me, expecting me to answer promptly, or even especially lobbing the same set of questions frequently, let alone just repeatedly, it does get kind of tiresome, folks. Again, it feels like a one-sided conversation. and that's not fun, that's not polite. So I want us to all have fun. I want this to be enjoyable, and I just don't find that to be the case in that particular scenario. How do we want to do this? Part of this is how I present the data, because a level currently, let's find it here. Data, little notepad. So currently we have our world event list, which contains world event list items. I could have 3 data values in this. So I could have an entity, which would have the catalog name converter on it. I could have where we're placing it, so a vector2. And then I could have a list of integers, which is the list of things this triggers. Because we only need each one to indicate that one-way direction. Okay. So we would have like a level entity list. So then we need a level entity. We need to define a level entity here. Okay. Not the best thing. This is a catalogable. Doesn't actually need to be a catalogable. It wouldn't be a catalogable. World event list item. We can have them be catalogables, but they don't need to be catalogables. Because the idea that this one is at this position and is triggered by that one is very map specific. This isn't even a matter of duplicating it. Just that we're using it as a copy constructor is really the only thing. Yeah, it's that we're using the copy constructor. Is all we're getting out of making them catalogable. But they're not actually in the catalog. That's okay. That's not ideal. But it makes it a possibility. Okay. So JSON constructor. Entity takes catalogable copy. Okay, if it is a level entity, okay, we'll have that ready for when we need it. Then we also need to have this pattern here. There we go. Again, we could load these in. We could load these into the catalog, but why? It's a Godot vector 2. Supposed, but is what is. This one actually needs to be a catalog conversion here. Take this one for now. I can't, it's a catalogable name converter of type entity. So this will be an actual catalog entry. List of integers. One way or another. It's equal to as an entity. Services, catalog, copy. Copy the entity from there, and position is equal to the level entity's position for each. Integer. Okay, for each one of these, we iterate over, we add those. Okay, so now we have our actual values. So this is entirely an informative object. When we set this thing up, we are going to just load that in. If we copy it, we just load it in. Then when we're using it, first, we're going to iterate over these. We're going to create copies of them, and we're going to place them at the relevant positions. Then, we iterate over each of these, and for the corresponding entity index, we are going to get the next entity. Given the list of these things, we are going to connect them to whatever is in their list. Hey there, Colin. Welcome. See, you are still sporting a clippy profile icon. So then we could have a list object that does this footwork for us. The entire digital content ownership / right to repair, all of that stuff is something I hope succeeds. But we don't really need to handle that here. We could handle it in the level. So we have our world event list here, but it doesn't need to be a world event list. The level can handle this. Because otherwise it's just going to be the exact same logic. We're just going to poke that list and say, do the thing. Stuff, level entities, set. That is expected to be drawn in raw from the JSON. Each Services, dot catalog, copy. Okay, so we've added a duplication for this thing. Whether it is in JSON we loaded in initially, or it is in a duplication logic. Really should have a start step, but I think initializing the level is... Yeah, I want to get some of this stuff out. So world event list.initialize. Okay, we're creating that. We're going to... load level entities. Okay, we iterate over them. We say entities.add. Is equal to services. Level entity.entity as entity. I could just... I really should template this function so whatever you pass in is whatever is expected out. It would save me the hassle of always predefining that, but is what it is. Okay, so we've loaded them up. They're in place. Then it's going to be this again. We need to do this a separate time. The first time makes the entities. Then the next time is going to get this isn't quite right. I is equal to 0, I is less than. Okay, for each of the level entity entries, we should have an entity entry. Then level entity dot entities to trigger dot count j++. Okay, so now we're going to iterate over the list again. Now that we've created the first pass of it, we have all of the entities in position where they're supposed to be. Then we are going to take this entity so this will be entities I add entity to trigger entities j. Okay, now we're setting up the trigger conditions on them. So now we add them into the world. Okay, so at the end of this, all of the entities that are created here will be added to the world. I can put any sort of entity I want in this pattern. Technically, we can use this to place the player, but that can be fiddly. But if it's the first entity in the list, then everything else should follow cleanly. In theory, it could be anything, but at the moment, the player is added in a special fashion. At the moment now, this doesn't need to happen. The game state will still rely on this. But we're getting close. We're getting close. Let me check something here. Okey-doke. We're getting there. Okay. So now we have a couple of things that we need to make sure are exposed. We need to make sure that collidable is exposed. So collidable changed is going to ripple outward. But that just informs the behavior subsequently. It's not listening for that. The entity collider is listening for that. When it gets an entity, so if the position changes, when we initialize after setting the entity, okay, we just need to make the collidability exposed. So this is a property. We can just say collidable here. Stay calm, take it easy, cruel. Let's keep everything chill, you know? Okay. So when we're we can set collidable. By default, it's true. If you change it, we'll invoke this message if it's available. But otherwise, we just set that. That will subsequently become relevant. But now we can set the collidable on or off. If the collidable is off, then that removes any risk to make this. Gives us a lot of flexibility here. So they can be non-collidable in advance. So any stray projectiles flying across the room don't hit them until they activate. All right, let's try to build. Let's try to get an interim in here. Okay, things still exist. Existing world event logic is happening. Okay. Oh, I appreciate the well wishes, Cruel. That beverage. It's beverage. Alright, this beverage is empty. What we need to do next is get a spawning entity into the world and have it trigger. So we need a trigger which varies according to what it is. If we make a trigger, we also need like a visibility flag here. Can I have an enemy without a sprite? Or without a visual? Let's look at our... I should be able to have an entity without a visual. The question is, do I need to make it so it won't break if it doesn't have a visual? Beep, 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 beep. Should be in rendering, entity rendering, individual node-based rendering, node renderer, and we're looking for a on entity added. Okay, if it has a visual, we will use it. Okay, we can make an invisible entity. Okay. So it's an enemy. We don't want it to be an enemy. Okay, we have... spawners. Many spawners are enemies because they can be struck by bullets, and in theory they can strike the player. Again, if you're old enough, gauntlet spawners were little piles of bones or whatnot that would periodically emit monsters, and you could remove them either by hitting them and doing damage, or you could run into them, and that would hurt you, but it would also have an effect on them. So perhaps the spawner deals damage to the player into itself, kind of scenario. Conditional damage, like if it doesn't do the hit, it doesn't hit itself. I have that logic in some of the things. I think the bullets have that, where they deal damage to themselves on impact only if they dealt damage. As in, one of the hearts reacted to the damage. If all of the hearts ignore the damage, or nothing acts against the damage message, then it does not inflict the harm on itself. No collision happened. So we would have a type of entity that is looking for the player Okay. So this creates a series of entity types related to the player. Should have a method for getting the collision mask in here somewhere. Yeah, okay. So this is what we run into. And the category is what we are. But this is no longer accurate. So it is 32 would be a trigger. Call this a player trigger. All right, let's do an interim real quick here. Should have tried to run it before I did that, but it's one of the advantages of having a repo like this. Okay. All that set up. Then we need our collision mask. So player trigger, it seeks the player. It will run into the player. We may end up not needing the points value, but it's there. That is effectively pickups. So most of the spawners can actually be enemies now. We'll have to make sure we give the spawner a sprite to begin with that tells us that it's there. Same way that the trigger will have a spawner or a visual to tell us that it's present. So if I step on that one, it will activate the next. So the spawner behavior wants a trigger message. The collision trigger is going to be the one that is looking for a collision message, and will cause it to call trigger on the entity. So we have entity behaviors. Currently we have spawner behaviors. We're now going to have trigger behaviors. Going to name them a little more expressively here. Because this isn't triggering a collision, it is triggering on collision. Duplicate some of this. Just take this little bit and copy it over. This does absolutely nothing. But we have this because it is a behavior. Because it's a behavior, it has to have those little bits here. Override process message. Protected override. Trigger should be a game message reply. In that. So apply. So then in our trigger on collision, we don't need any information about the collision message currently. For now, we're just going to say i.merge entity.trigger. We don't care, it's just a trigger happened. Did anything happen with it? We're saying it was acted on, it wasn't consumed. Let the message continue. Was acted on is something that I mentioned just a moment ago. Let's say a bullet hits an enemy, but that enemy is like intangible or has recently taken a hit and won't take another hit for half a second or something like that. That bullet doesn't count as having hit that enemy. It was not acted on because the damage that it dealt, the event that went through the hearts, nothing happened. If none of the other behaviors do anything with it either, then nothing occurred. So the message that the bullet triggered to inflict harm didn't happen. So then when it comes back and says, hey, I tried to inflict harm on my target, did it work? That event will have a no, it wasn't acted on. So the subsequent event that says, then inflict some harm on yourself to show you hit a target for the purposes of like bouncing or anything like that, that won't happen. So the ball would continue along. Alternately, it's possible that something takes the hit, but no damage happened. The ball doesn't care that no actual damage happened. It just cares that something registered a hit. Okay. So, trigger on collision is a behavior that says, if I get a collision message, do the thing. So, target then own health is one of the things I was talking about here. So first, we're going to send a health message to our target. So target handle message, new health message. Then, if it was reacted on, so this is target then own health, then we're going to say one of these collisions happened, and we will continue along. And we'll actually do the next thing. So if we have a collision, so here's kill collision target here. We're going to make a collision remove self. That it raises the trigger on collision and it removes itself. There, now we have a remove self one. So what we'll do is we'll have trigger on collision, and then we'll have collision remove self. So the trigger is saying as soon as something bumps into me, I'm going to trigger my targets, and then I'm going to go away. Then in the spawner behavior here, right now it's what we're going to do is we're going to have I could have a universal on behaviors, that is it a triggered behavior? Like, does it need a trigger? If it needs a trigger, then it won't do anything in handle message unless it gets triggered. That creates a lot of complexity, though. Because there are some behaviors that kind of need an initialize. They need to get revved up. For example, weapon behaviors, when they're being queued up, get like whatever the next weapon is. That still needs revision, though. I kind of like the idea that they don't do any processing if they're not ready to go. So we put that in behavior. Oh, we could just have a gate. I haven't used a gate in a while. This is almost exactly what they're for. Here. So what we're going to do is, this is going to be a get this in here. So a triggered gate doesn't do anything except wait for the condition to happen. So if we look at a timer gate, we get a gate result process message. We are just going to have okay, so a triggered gate requires that a trigger happens before it opens, and once it opens, it stays open. If we are not triggered, and structure. In theory, if I duplicate a gate that has already been triggered, it is a triggered gate. It has already been triggered. And that's fine. So this is just real quick. We're not bothering what type is it. We're not bothering setting it. If it's already triggered, we just continue. Then if it's not triggered but we don't get a trigger message, we just continue. This means that to pass through this gate, you have to receive a trigger message in advance. So on the spawner, we can take our spawner behavior and add this gate to it and have it happen before the removal one. So any message that tries to get past this is blocked until the trigger comes through. The entity itself and any preceding behaviors still get their message, but the gate blocks it. Consume message is what completely stops it. So if we process message but we don't consume it, then we allow things to continue past it. So that would be for, let's say there's a particular behavior in a chain that happens every second or something like that. That means that behavior will pop up every second, but it doesn't prevent all the subsequent behaviors from firing when it's not. So if its gate says, hey, 1 second has passed, you may continue, or you may do your thing, it doesn't, when that's not true, it doesn't eat the message. It allows everything after it to still work. So if I have, move in a straight line, then once a second start bouncing, but otherwise, and then move in a spiral, when it isn't starting its bounce, it will still move in a spiral. We have an example that we show periodically that is wait 3 seconds. Wait 3 seconds behaves this way. Is until 3 seconds has passed, it doesn't process the message, and it consumes it. So the behavior won't get the message, and nothing after it gets it either. But once those 3 seconds has passed, the current behavior gets the message, and it continues along to everybody else. Doki. supplies. We have the self-destruct. The fact that it's a trigger message means we could have things like a trigger type added in. The presence of triggers is plenty of complexity at the moment, though. Oh. Eye on some stuff here. Yeah. Okie dokie. All right, we're in a good position right now. Buttons. So, we are moving along. We are near having the new spawning pattern in place. What we've got is a series of entities that we throw out into the world at the start of a level. Each of those entities can be whatever we want. They could be enemies, they could be the player, they could be bullets, it doesn't matter, but more likely there are going to be triggers and spawners. Those triggers are most likely going to be when you get close enough to this one, it sets off a spawner. That spawner now exists in the world and can emit enemies. Whether that spawner has a I will only spawn for so long, I will spawn indefinitely, I will spawn until I'm destroyed, regardless of how that functions, that's going to be our pattern. So we will make a level, we will define where the triggers are, and we will define where the spawners are. Then we connect the triggers to the spawners, and we run with that from there. This still allows us to have a spawner that exists with no trigger and just starts going and starts emitting enemies with the same spawn pattern that we have been using, which is spawn them around the player and have them swarm in. But this result the way that we've got it set up means that we don't have to rely just on timers. We can rely on any number of elements here. So yeah, making progress. Well, folks, I do hope you had a good time watching with us today. If you like what you saw and would like to see more, remember to like, follow, subscribe, comment. All of those things do help the channels grow. If you'd like to consider financially supporting the channel, you can do so through platform-specific means like memberships and subscriptions to get access to those platform-specific benefits. Or if you just want to directly support the channel, you can do so through Patreon and Coffee and similar things. But with that said, I hope the rest of your day is good, and I'll see you next time.